going? All right, everybody. Welcome to this week's Live with Kevin. I am here with Zach Smiley. He is with Evolved Dog Training. And Zach, you are from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, which is pretty cool. So as we go through this, if anybody's in Oklahoma City, I don't know. How big is Oklahoma City, Zach? Is that very large or?
Well, talking square mileage, it's huge.
Okay.
Population, it's pretty small compared to a lot of places.
So would you only service?
Well,
would you only service Oklahoma City then, or do you go outside of it as well?
So for people that are in Oklahoma, I'll service things as far as like Norman, which is about a 40-minute drive. But so I don't just stick to the local city. I do kind of expand out a little bit, but I'm not doing anything like as far as Tulsa. Basically everything within a 45-minute drive, I'll be able to take. So
sounds reasonable. And you do remote training as well. So
yeah, I do remote training.
Cool. Well, so that's a quick plug for you. We'll mention that again at the end. But today, Zach is here to talk with us about deaf dogs. So Zach, that's what you're here to do. I hope you know what you're talking about. No, I'm just kidding. So Zach, you've got Tech, who is, how old is Tech?
Tech is now 7.
And so Tech lacks the ability to hear. So that's something that you've obviously had to kind of work through. So kind of before we dive more specifically into Tech, I kind of like to start off by asking like, what got you into dogs? What's the deal with that?
Yeah. So, I didn't grow up with dogs. I always wanted one though. My mom was just deathly afraid of them for the longest time. So we never had dogs. We had other things like cats and rabbits and things like that. And so when I had the opportunity, after moving out and being, my young 21-year-old self, I decided I was going to get a dog, and that was Tech. And, dove into trying to train him, kind of did the normal route that people take, kind of following celebrities on TV and then just buying a couple of random books off the shelves and reading, and tried some things. And I just, some things didn't work out. And then ultimately found, books by Gene Donaldson and, Pat McConnell and some other great positive reinforcement trainers. And I started having success and was sold. And Tech is what got me into it. When we found out he was deaf, it really drove me deep into it because I just wanted to figure out, how do I train this dog? He's obviously much different. I have to figure out what's special about training deaf dogs. And I really, really dove in and just fell in love with the science of all of it and applying it and seeing dogs, just become better dogs or become more well-behaved dogs, right? So.
I think that like your story is so similar to others, minus the deaf dog part, but like so many dog trainers get into it because they have a dog that they're like, oh, I need some help with, or I need to figure out how to teach them. And then, well, let me figure it out. And then you kind of get into it. And then you really, I think we call it like you catch the bug, you get really excited about it and you just dive in. So that's pretty cool. I mean, again, like I think, and we'll talk about it, but I just, the potential maybe challenges of having a dog that can't hear you, or also like I think in some ways it's probably kind of nice too. So I remember seeing some of your videos when you're doing your, the band that you're in and the singing you're doing, and Tech's just like lying there like, oh, I can't hear anything. And so it's pretty cool. But there's so much to talk about in regards to like what got you into dog training and reading Gene's books and all that. I mean, we could go on all day about that because it's like there's like a plethora of information, and that's awesome about that. But so I guess I want to know, and I've worked with clients that have dogs that are deaf, but what is it like living with a dog that can't hear you? And I know also you do have dogs that can hear, but with Tech, what's it like living with him?
So it's I find it to be fairly normal when I compare my life with him with other friends and family and stuff. It's really very similar. When I came in, like I said, I dove in like, how do I train this deaf dog? He's obviously special and different, blah blah blah. Well, he can't hear. It's the training of them and his dog behavior in general is all the same. He doesn't know that he's handicapped. I wouldn't even really call it a handicap because he has no clue. So it's not that much different. Obviously, I can't like recall him. So when he's asleep, he is asleep, right? So I come home and it takes him 5-10 minutes to smell me and wake up and come look for me and find me. If the puppies don't wake him up, of course. So, I don't think living with a deaf dog is too much different outside of the fact that they are not going to hear your recalls. You have to be a little bit You have to approach waking them up a little bit differently, obviously, because you don't want to spook them too much. But I'd say, people are scared of getting deaf dogs because they think it's going to be way, way different. And it's really not. It's a lot of the same stuff. So.
What do you, with like waking him up, for example? I mean, naturally I would think, well, obviously you could like touch him and maybe give him a treat after. So therefore waking him up by being touched is something that's good or whatever. But also like vibrations, maybe if you stomp your feet, he could feel that and kind of open his eyes, right?
Yep. We do. I use some stomps every now and usually not when he's sleeping. I'll save that for just like trying to get his attention. If we're in a house or something, and I can stomp my foot and kind of get him to turn around and look at me. And when he's asleep, I will do a couple of things. I have done some conditioning, like you were saying, where I lightly touched him and kind of spooked him awake, and then there was a handful of goodies, waiting for him. So it's, he's really okay about getting woken up that way now. Another way you can do it is putting your hand in front of their nose or a treat in front of their nose, and just, that kind of classic thing we do with sleeping dogs and seeing how long until that smell triggers them awake. So that's always a good way to do it too. But yeah.
That's fun to watch. I've, watching people put things in front of their dogs' noses when they're sleeping. And it's like, man, you must be in quite the deep sleep if you're not waking up instantly when I put this whatever in front of your face. They probably, I wonder if they're like all of a sudden kick into dream mode, like, oh man, I'm dreaming and I can smell this wonderful peanut butter. And then, I don't know. But so, and I always I think that so many people have issues with, I guess we can call it like watchdog barking, but more like to the sound. So like, a mailman comes and if your mailbox is on your house and puts the mail in, and maybe your dog, doesn't see him at all, but hears it and then rah, 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 rah. Or, just sounds of people outside, dogs outside. So I always felt like there's the added bonus of, oh, your dog can't hear that. Do you feel, I mean, again, you have multiple dogs. Do you feel like that's a nice thing, or?
It's 100% a nice thing. I have never had to deal with watchdog barking until I got Villain. And so he's my 1-year-old Catahoula, and he is he will trigger at any sound. I can't hear it at all. And he'll start going off and, text snoozes even through him going off and stuff, so it's definitely, there are pros and cons. I don't have to worry about him worrying about barking dogs on the other side of fences, when we're walking the neighborhood. I don't have to worry about him getting distracted by people going, oh, puppy, anything like that. He just, takes everything in stride because he can't hear anything. So it's a beautiful thing, whereas with my hearing dogs, they are, especially being some herdy breeds, they kind of hear everything and they're very hyper vigilant, and, they're barking at all the stuff and reacting to all the stuff. And so
I feel like it opens your eyes because you went from dog that hears nothing, and it's like, oh, in some ways it might be very easy. Like you said, walking on the street, he's not looking at dogs, barking at him. Now, like you have the dogs like Villain. And what's your other dog's name?
Oh, Nugget.
Nugget. Is he yours now, or are you fostering him?
He's a foster fail, and he is now officially mine.
Cool. Well, so it just like opens up your eyes now too. I mean, and again, you've been around dogs obviously before, but like, oh, okay, well, now I've got to train in ways that I didn't have to before. I've got to work on leave its or watch me or something like that. So good for your training skills. But again, I'm still a little jealous of having a deaf dog. And, it's funny because I worked with a deaf dog a couple months ago. Her name is Odessa, and she did the strangest thing. Maybe she could hear a tiny, tiny bit, like a very, very little amount, because she would be sleeping and then just like all of a sudden wake up and startle and start running in a direction and start barking.
Oh, wow.
And it really looked like she heard something by like her body language and everything. Yeah. And it wouldn't typically be directed at somebody. Like sometimes if a person, and maybe it was vibration related, I don't know, but I don't know where I'm going with that. But so I guess, in that moment though, it's not like you can call her away, like, hey, come here, it's okay, take a treat. Right. So I had them work on conditioning it. So anytime she did that, just let's pop some treats in her mouth, because I really couldn't find a definite trigger of it. I couldn't figure out what was causing it. Yeah. But at the same point, I just said, let's condition it. Let's just turn whatever it is into predictor good stuff. And it decreased. And it by the next time I saw her, it was happening like half the time, and the falling time, it was almost non-existent. So
awesome.
But enough about me. Sorry, I get a little excited about myself.
Good. I'll say good work.
But I guess going back to it, you mentioned, I don't know your timeline actually. So when did you get tech and when did you start the academy? Which happened first?
So the tech came first. Tech was the catalyst for all of it. It was probably, so I got tech in October of 2000 and it would have to be 2013. So, and then I was in the academy in February of 2014. So it was 6 months or so. I had some troubles with him pretty quick using some of the training methods that I found on TV. And then, just like, this is wrong. Something is wrong here. I've got a 16-week-old puppy that's like chainsaw biting my arm. Like, there's something going wrong. And so I started looking into books. And, as soon as I found The Culture Clash by Gene, I like read that book and I knew, I was like, this isn't just something I want to do with my dog. I want to do this as a career. Like, I know that I want to do this. And so it was a couple months after that that I pulled out a loan against my 401k and paid off, the tuition, and said, I'm doing this. And I was full send. So there's been some on and off times because of life. It's been a little while for me to get my business going because of some life stuff, but it's always been there, and I've always, been training and stuff like that, and learning as much as I can as often as possible. So.
Well, and part of what you just said makes me think too, like the fact that you were like, hey, I want to do this for a living. I really want to get into this. Let me go ahead and get like a formal education. And that's something that Gene really talks heavily about. Like, hey, if we're going to do this, we need to get, people need to be educated because it's an unregulated industry. Anybody can say they're a dog trainer.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of working with people way before I should have. If anybody is watching that I worked with back in the day, I'm not talking about you, but I'm like guilty of doing some stuff that I'm like, what was I doing back then? And why was I taking people's money for it? So I just know that like it's so important. And I really, taking what you just said, I would love to give the advice to anybody watching that wants to potentially be a dog trainer. Take your education seriously. Go to a place like the Academy for Dog Trainers, for example, where you can get a really good education. So, and if you think about it, it's relatively cheap in the grand scheme of things, meaning, yes, it's not cheap in the sense of like you can pay with, your pocket change, but
it's not
any other
cheap.
well, any other career, like you go and get a 2-year degree, 4-year degree, you're looking at what, 20, 30, 40,000 or something like that. And pretty much any other career, you kind of have to do that. Maybe not any other, but with the dog training, you don't have to, but it's really worth it to spend 5, 6, 7 grand and have an education that's going to do all the dogs justice that you are working with. So you got that education, and then it basically opened up your eyes to how to help him. So like you said, you had him, he was like chainsaw biting your arm. I've never heard that before. That's good.
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh, light bulb went off. Now I know how to communicate with him. Right. So it just really opened up your eyes and made it easier.
Yep. Sure enough, I, found out, how to do luring properly and using, fading out lures into hand signals and all that fun stuff, and just being able to use that and create a line of communication with him that was, still really fluid to this day. He just wave my hand around and he kind of goes where I tell him to go, and he does his sits and his downs, and he recalls with a really good hand signal, and he does his leave its and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, man, it just it really opened up the door for us. And not that I don't think I wouldn't have gotten there eventually, but man, it just helped me get there so much faster. And I don't think that I would be the trainer I am now if I hadn't have gone. So, I would have fumbled around for a lot longer and probably made a lot more mistakes. So
do people think you're like a magician when they're like watching you with your hand signals and everything? Like, well, how are you getting this dog? You're not even saying anything, or, just that people can be amazed when you're good at training a dog. So, let's jump into kind of how-tos. So for instance, leave it. Like when I use leave it, it's kind of a good catch-all. Like, hey, leave that. I don't want you getting into it. And it's much easier to verbally communicate that, because if my dog's over there looking at the garbage can, I would like to be able to say, leave it. And that's a perfect example of how like a verbal cue is used to your advantage. So like what with Tech, for example, if he is, and I'll just give one example and you could change it, but if he's thinking about the garbage, maybe he doesn't, maybe he's one of those dogs that doesn't care about the garbage, but if he is, and you wanted him to leave it, what would, like, one, how did you teach it? And if we use that example, how would you implement it into like day-to-day life in that example, for that example?
Right. So I taught him leave it pretty much the same way you teach a hearing dog. Just kind of started out with treats in my hand, making sure that he's pulling his face away from it, doing an open hand and rewarding him for not going for the treats and stuff like that, and working up. We did a couple of higher value things and stuff like that just to get it on board, and kind of generalize it a little bit. And we use a hand signal that's this. If I'm sorry for any ASL people out there, I think this means to leave. I used it that way, and so we can do that when he's looking. Of course, when we're in situations when he's not looking, you can't tell him to leave it. So
Okay.
he was a trash can diver. He would get in the trash can and eat all that stuff. And I really couldn't do much about that unless he was, paying attention to me in even the slightest capacity, right? So we just manage that most of the time. We just keep our trash can away so he can't get into it and things like that. Out on walks is when people ask about that a lot too. Like, how do you tell them to leave stuff on walks? And we've just I don't tell them to leave stuff. I basically have a little tactile cue where I tug the leash lightly 3 times, and then he just turns around and looks at me. So it's a little watch me cue. And then from there, I can give him the leave it cue and we can move on past whatever it is that he might have gone towards.
Okay.
So that's kind of how I deal with it there. So there's a couple of things that you have to install, obviously. And that's in a situation where you don't have control of their body with like a leash or something, you pretty much just have to manage that stuff. So,
which is kind of like good advice across the board anyway, because we so much of like we have to alter our lives if we're going to have dogs in our homes. Like we can't just go about day-to-day life and say, hey, you need to adjust hey dog, you need to adjust yourself to live here. So I mean, in general, yes, like we have our garbage can in one of those things that in the cabinet that pulls in and pulls out, and I had to put a child lock on it because my dog V, that's like a game to him. He's like, yes, today's the day I'm going to finally get into that garbage. And I mean, yeah, I can ask him to leave it if I left it open and I'm doing dishes and all that, like that's one thing, but normally we just manage by having it shut. So, but that kind of gives really good information. So maybe I think the way that I'm taking what you just said is it's important to have realistic expectations for a dog that's deaf, because we can't communicate verbally, obviously. And if they're not close enough to communicate by touching or whatever, then it is what it is. We just have to manage. So that's kind of what I took away from that. Well, so, and I always tell people too, like leave it and watch. They're kind of almost the same thing. I mean, obviously we might say it differently, but it's, hey, basically disengage from that thing. Obviously watch means like look all the way up here, whereas leave it doesn't. But ultimately, if you're doing like the, like you mentioned, like three little leash, however you worded it, would be like the cue to at least get him to pay attention to you. Or did you say that was your watch cue?
That's my watch cue. When we're out on walk. We'll do 3 little light tugs on the leash, and then he turns around and looks up at me, and then I'll give him the leave it cue. Whether or not that's actually, maybe he's doing all that off of the initial cue, and I don't have to necessarily give him the leave it cue. Obviously, I'm not 100% sure, but that's how we get him to look up to me and provide that cue to him out and about.
It's how cool is it that we can communicate with dogs in ways that doesn't involve just using our voice? I mean,
it's so amazing. And I try and get everybody using hand signals out the gate anyways. Kind of we're taught that in the academy to get them on board with hand signals and then transfer the cues over. And I find that people actually enjoy using hand signals and stuff a little bit more than they use verbal cues. The dogs pick up on them easier. They learn them, I feel like they learn them faster and stronger, right? And so when they're sitting there, they only have to do one hand signal to get their dog into a sit, rather than them sit, please sit. Will you sit now? Come on, sit. Can you sit? No, they just move their hand once and the dog's like, oh, I know, I've got that. I can do that. So, I love hand signals. I think they're great. So.
Have you done a TikTok video of you just doing a hand signal and then like tech sitting and then hand signal tech downing? If you haven't, you should do that.
I think I have a really old one when I first started my account that probably only has like 100 views on it or something. I should probably do an update video.
I've never done TikTok. I'm not good at that, but I might have a good idea for you there. Well, and again, that's just so cool to think about. Like, we talk, and as you know, people have a tendency to just say, "Hey, leave it. Seriously, leave it. Come on, bad dog," and we just blah 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 blah. And our dogs are just tuning us out because what we're saying to them more often than not means nothing. It's the consequences of what we're doing, but also if we have a hand signal, we're very consistent about it, right? We can just give it once, and our dogs are like, "Oh, that's pretty clear," and they can kind of figure it out a little bit faster, I feel like, right?
Yep.
So,
No
I
doubt.
mean, it's fun. I think what people are going to take away from this, at least so far, is that having a deaf dog really isn't that hard. I mean, it's like you said in the very beginning, it's not really that hard. It's just kind of like you do things a little bit differently, but they can still learn.
Yep.
Well, which then brings me to my next question, which is like, how do you teach a dog that can't hear you to come when you call? Because I mean, you can't call; they're not going to listen to you. So, like, what did you do with tech, and what are some ways to teach that?
Yeah. So again, is a lot of the stereotypical ways that you can teach recalls. We used to do where you hook him up to a leash, have someone hold him, and then I get him all hyped up, get him, get a little bit of hyperactivity and frustration going, and then you kind of back up, and then I would do just a really broad hand signal. He's got a huge recall signal. I pull my hand all the way up over my head, um, and and ultimately just worked that, reinforced it heavily, 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 heavily. And we just practiced that in multiple scenarios, at the park and stuff like that. And I also would take him out on long lines.
Okay.
And once I get to a point where he's doing recalls fairly well off the hand signals in the backyard, take him out on a long line somewhere. And at that point, you just wait for them to look at you, right? So
Okay.
you got them on the long line. They're not going anywhere. They're safe. Wait for them to look at you, recall, and you just practice it that way, of course, heavily reinforcing. And of course, I think a tip that I use a lot with all recalls is recall less times than you really want to, right? Because you want to make the recall have that super strong classically conditioned response where they know, like, I'm getting a fat yummy snack every single time.
Yeah.
And the more we can keep that 1-to-1 ratio solid, the better. And so, yeah, it's all very much the same thing. You just have to do it with them in view, with you in view. You can't do it with their back turned. Like, I can't do the fun pre-Mac recalls really with Tech, normally,
Yeah.
because he's not gonna he can't hear me, so I can't sit there and happy talking back over to me. But yeah, you could still do it. All the other classic recall things that you have, people helping you out by holding them, and then of course getting them out on a long line, and just waiting for them to offer their eye contact, and then giving the recall cue from there.
So basically, what you're saying too is that by doing enough practice and repetition, you're going to develop a dog that's going to be kind of questioning where you're at,
Yeah.
meaning he's going to be kind of like, you're going to call me? You're going to call me? Something to that effect.
Yeah, and we actually, on top of that, have trained up a lot of check-in behavior
Okay.
specifically for that. So I reinforced Tech for years every time he came to me, whether I asked him to or not. If he was on the long line and he came to give me attention, he was getting fed.
Okay.
And that's you produce exactly what you're talking about. You produce a dog that isn't just out and about in the environment, sniffing the ground and never checking in with you. It's he sniffs the environment, and he goes around, but not very long. It's 30 seconds to a minute before he's up and looking and checking in, and seeing if I'm calling him over, or if he can come get a freebie or something like that. And it's so powerful now that it's hard to practice recalls because he's always coming to check in on his own. So
You're like, no, go away, get out of here,
yeah,
go
exactly.
sniff.
Leave me alone. I'm not giving you treats right now, and then hopefully I have an opportunity. So
Text, like, he could have a cartoon with a little bubble saying, watch me work my human, or something like that. I mean, when you do coming when called, and everything you just described makes perfect sense. And whether you're doing it with a dog that is deaf or whether you're doing one with one that can hear, like, that's what I like to develop regardless. As a dog that's kind of, I'm almost playing like hard to get in some ways. Like, my dog is kind of like checking in, like, is he going to call? Is he going to call? Like, I want to be a part of the equation. I think a lot of people,
yeah.
they don't, like, it's not that hard to develop as long as you spend a little bit of time with it. And people, I think, oftentimes get stuck into a bind, like, oh, they don't practice it at all, and then their dog gets out the door, and then come here, and the dog's like, whatever, I'm busy right now. But so, like, this is like, what is that? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of gold. I forget what that saying is, but
Half the prevention is worth a pound of cure.
oh, there it is. I always said that wrong, so thank you. Finally, somebody knows it. I say it all the time, which I should just stop because I don't know what it is, and yet no one corrects me.
They get the idea. They get
Yeah, especially when you say it as convincing as I just did. Like, yeah. But so it's I don't know. I love that feedback, or that information there, because I could see that a lot of people would, with a deaf dog, be like, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. And I guess if we get to the point where you're doing something off leash in an area that's appropriate to do so, like a dog park or whatever, and you want to try to get to off leash and you still want to be able to call your dog, then you really need to work a system like that where they're going to potentially be checking in. So And you mentioned long leads, which are like my favorite things, because I like being able to control like how far my dog can go, and obviously prevent my dog from running off. So I would you agree that you think everyone should have a long lead in their training bag, if you will, to practice that kind of stuff?
100%. Long leads are a gift from the doggy gods. They truly are. I'm not. Once you get to a point where you're going out in the trees and stuff like that, I know they can get kind of annoying, but they are amazing tools to have. You know, because you can give your dog that extra level of freedom without actually giving them dangerous freedom, right? So you're not going to be running away from you completely. You know, they
Hmm.
may get to the end of their 15 or 30-foot line, and you know that and then they're there. They're at the end of the line, right? They're not running off into the distance after the squirrel that they just started chasing. So they're super good tools. I recommend everybody get one, you know, at least 30 feet or something like that. And you know, you can use them for getting out to big old open fields and just letting your dog have that bit of extra freedom too, you know. So it's great for all dogs, whether deaf or hearing. So
And it kind of gives you, it's not all or nothing. It gives you that in between. Like, well, you can, if you maybe you have a dog, like let's say, I don't know, a beagle that like you feel like you'll never be able to completely be off leash because you're worried that his nose is just going to take him away. Well, this gives him that off leash freedom, yet we still have a means of catching our dog if for some
right.
reason our dog is not responding. And then I'll often too, maybe you do this as well, but I'll like graduate to, okay, I feel really good about you being within 30 feet. I'm gonna go ahead and drop the lead now. And if something goes wrong, I've got at least 30 extra feet to catch you. And I'm make sure I'm pretty confident with the dog before I get to that point. But
Mhm.
so that's all. I mean, it's really cool. Is there anything else that you would say, kind of like about training a dog that can't hear? Is there anything else you'd like to add that we didn't cover today?
Just you know, be patient with yourself. You know, it's that's I think the biggest lesson that I've learned through dog training is to develop patience with you, with your dog, and yourself. You know, you're learning a lot of stuff to teach the dog, and it's going to change your behavior in the process too. So there's not just behavior change going on with the dog, there's behavior change going on with yourself, and it takes a long time sometimes to really get in there and do that. So just be patient. And I think this is advice that goes good for all dog owners, obviously not just deaf dog owners, but the deaf dog owners, because of the frustration you may be going through dealing with a dog that can't hear, be a little bit more forgiving with your dog and yourself, right? They're not doing it out of spite or anything like that, of course. They just can't hear, and they need a little bit extra attention in regards to their training and stuff like that. But yeah, just be patient. Just be patient. So
Well, and patience, like you just said, I mean, if we wanted to change our own behavior, how long does that take?
oh
You
my
know?
God, years. Just from personal experience, it takes forever.
Yeah. So the what, and then we take another like a dog, and we're like, hey, I need to change your behavior, and it's amazing what we can actually do in a short period of time. But to really change a dog's behavior, I mean, we're lucky how easily we are able to do it, but it's still going to take time and patience, like you said. So it's pretty cool. Well, so just to kind of recap everything, if anybody has any questions, if I don't see any right now, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to leave them, and we'll come back. I'll come back and send them to Zach if he wants to look at them, whatnot. But Zach is from he's certified through the Academy for Dog Trainers from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. If anybody wants to work with him, if you're in this area, reach on out. What is your website? Is it evolvedogtraining.com?
Yep, just evolvedogtraining.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. So.
Ding ding. And you also do remote stuff. So if anybody is looking for help remotely, boom, there you go. And
Yep.
if you're not sure about remote training, it's actually really awesome and pretty darn easy. We can communicate pretty nicely through that and help out a lot.
Yep.
So I'm going to go ahead and end the live feed. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Zach, hang on for 1 second for me. But I'll talk to y'all next week. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks again.
Bye, everybody.